What I do is inconsequential. Why I do what I do is I get to shorten people's journeys every day. What I love about our hospitality industry is that it's our mission to make people feel cared for while on their journeys. Together, we'll explore what hospitality means in the built environment, in business, and in our daily lives. I'm Dan Ryan, and this is Defining Hospitality. This podcast is sponsored by Berman Falk Hospitality Group, a design-driven furniture manufacturer who specializes in custom case goods and seating for hotel guest rooms. Today's guest is a driven and creative architecture and design professional with an entrepreneurial spirit. He is a leader and speaker in our hospitality industry, attending and participating in events such as BDNY and Global Hospitality Talk. For the past 30 years, he's grown his award-winning firm, which has been selected for AIA Chicago's Interior Architecture Award, Crane's Chicago Business Award for Best of 2018 Event Spaces, and many more. He's a principal and founder at DMAC or DMAC Architecture and Interiors. Ladies and gentlemen, Dwayne MacEwen. Welcome, Dwayne.
Dan, thank you so much for having me. It's an honor to be here.
And I assume you are in Chicago right now, correct?
I'm in Chicago at my office.
Okay, so do you feel like you're speaking to a celebrity with the name Dan Ryan, being that you're in Chicago and that I have, since starting this podcast, an expressway named after me?
I was going to ask you about the traffic, actually, if we had time.
Yeah, everyone always says it's bad, and I'm just kidding. It's not named after me, everyone.
So
no false
could
promotion.
be. Maybe after this podcast, it will be. Maybe.
So I just want everyone to know I got in touch with Dwayne recently at BDNY, and we connected. We started talking, and there's a lot of really cool things about Dwayne that you'll all find out. But the thing that really jumped out at me the most is early on in his career, he started off at Jordan Mosier in Chicago, which also launched so many other awesome people within our industry. So I want to talk about that experience and like the type of people that were attracted there and like that diaspora of alums from there that kind of helped everyone go on and create these really cool career arcs. But it's just interesting how some firms and some life experiences launch so many interesting people within our industry or any industry as like a breeding ground for really good thinking. So I just want to take note of that, and we can dig into that in a bit. But before we get into it, Dwayne, why do you like hospitality? What does it mean to you?
I mean, I think in a way we look at hospitality as not something that is applied to a project. I think if you think of the traditional terms of hospitality, it's, food and beverage, entertainment. It seems like it belongs to the service sector. And I think because all the work we do is really in service of the people that they use those spaces. So whether it's even a utility building or, even outside of what I think people think is a norm of hospitality, we sort of get to hospitality through our process of designing for the people and places, where we work, rather than a specific programmatic type. And I think that's why we've been successful and some firsts in the sense that, whether it's an airport lounge or an automotive country club in Miami, that we had no business being invited to the table, but succeeded at developing something really special by thinking outside of the box and applying hospitality to everything that we do.
Okay, so thank you for bringing up the Airline Lounge. I know many of us listeners are road warriors and always on the road, and hopefully sometimes we don't get to the airport with enough time to go to the lounge because we're always so busy. But for when we do, I really appreciate those moments. And the story of you having never done an airport lounge before, and I always wonder, like, who creates these places? But then you mentioned that the Points guy, who I follow as like an influencer in the travel industry, said that it was like one of the best lounge experiences he's had at American Airlines. That's like super surprising to me. So how did you find that? Like, that seems like such a coveted travel design project. Like, how did all that come together?
I mean, it's interesting. So in 2018, I was in the Wellness Pavilion at HD Expo in Las Vegas. I was part of a panel discussion on wellness. And I think too often, the the terms like, sustainability, biophilia, those sort of check the box terms. And we were presenting a project that we had done in Chicago as the Midtown, Athletic Club, which was sort of more of a health club resort than it was a traditional health club. And we sort of applied, again, the sort of hospitality lens to that project. And I think I said something like, you can't bumper sticker wellness. And that it resonated with somebody in the audience who happened to be the head of premium services for American Airlines. And she stuck around to talk to me afterwards. And, you know, again, we had never done an airport lounge. Fast forward probably, 6-9 months later, it was actually December, I think 18th of 2019, where we signed a contract to do the rebranding of American Airlines for their lounges sort of worldwide. And so they went to the mat for us because I think they wanted something other than a commodity for an airport lounge. I think when you go to people, sometimes when you go to people that specialize in certain genres, there's a sort of de facto solution that's, put forth, and don't worry about it. We got this. We know how to do this. And there was a lot of rigor. There was a lot of listening. There was a lot of back and forth. And I've always said to clients, it's more important to ask the right questions and be a good listener than thinking of all the answers. Because I think when architecture and interior design can become a commodity, if you don't continue to challenge and question yourself. And I mean, ultimately, it's such a wonderful, wonderful profession in the sense that, we work with, whether it's an airport lounge or a hairstylist, they care as much about our profession or, their profession as we do about ours. Mm. And something that struck me, digging in, like Gil, who we worked with at American Airlines, I mean, he was in the trenches with us, as we developed this over a year for then the first, basically the model room, if you will, or the prototype at Reagan National in DC. I mean, this big entity, American Airlines, and you're working with a big team. And I mean, they leaned in as much as we did in terms of caring about the product. And I think that was really rewarding. And I mean, some of the rewards of this business, you can't always put them in the bank, but if you develop a good project and you sort of maybe change the model a little bit and move it forward, I think that's really important. And I mean, simple things like, we get a manual for wayfinding. I'm like, I hate wayfinding. If I feel like as architects, if we need signs pointing people where to go, we haven't done our job as designers. And even, how do you occupy that negative space and how do you move through it? And if that's not intuitive, then I think we failed.
So that's something that's really surprising to me. I know you shared this with me earlier, and I always think that wayfinding or signage is an unsung vocation, if you will, because when it's done properly, you don't notice it. When it's done improperly, you're like, wait, I just walked 30 feet the wrong direction. I have no idea where I am. How do I fix this? And I think what surprised me about your story with American Airlines, you'd never done an airline lounge before, which is remarkable because that's like a huge undertaking and quite an investment that they're making on you. But I believe you told me that you used very little or no signage. How is that possible in an airport lounge where everyone is trying to get from point A to point B so quickly?
Well, and I think part of the concept, or at least, part of the DNA of the project was that if we can use materials and finishes to interface how you navigate the space and understand the space, so very much how you interact with your iPhone, it's very intuitive. So that's what we wanted the airport lounge to do in terms of, so we had a dining pavilion, a lounge pavilion, and literally the only sign other than a few, very subtle sort of American Airlines branding pieces was to denote the men's and women's restrooms.
That sounds so insane to me, especially within the confines of an airport where I can't even imagine the amount of like regulations from the FAA down to just local jurisdictions and everything else that are there that there wouldn't be more of an intense pressure to have more signage or put a sign on it, put a bird on it like they did in that Portlandia
Right.
many moons ago. But it's like, that's so insane. So like how do you make a physical space so intuitive that you don't need signage, where there normally is, you're overwhelmed with signage.
Well, I think it's not just because it was DC, but I mean, most of our work has a path and reward system of moving people through space. So, if you turn to your right or your left, and especially in DC, it makes so much sense with the boulevards. You get the Washington Monument, the Capitol building. So we know it's no accident that the fireplace is when you check in is on your left when you walk in. It's no accident that going to the right, you see a different sort of quality of space in terms of how it's lit. It's a little brighter. The food and beverage is there, and it's defined by these white metal tubes, which we call the dining pavilion. And the lounge pavilion it's more of a wooden box in terms of understanding the vocabulary of that. So I think using, again, materials and finishes to communicate that, and maybe more importantly, the space planning becomes more important, in my opinion, than even the finishes. I mean, how you sort of move through space and understanding that architecture and interiors really exists in what we don't build. It's a space in between things. We affect those moments by the material finish on the wall, what it looks like, how does it absorb sound, absorb light, bounce it back. All those things become incredibly important. So you can tell spaces that were designed just based on taste or trend because they have a very short shelf life. And you might get that definitive photograph, in the magazine and it looks great. But when you go into those spaces and they don't feel great, there's something missing. And that's where I think I've always said that, architecture used to contain the arts and it's become a container for the arts. And we're fortunate in the sense that, we're architects. I don't want to say first, but we're architects that do interior design or interior designers that do architecture, but the materials and finishes are in service of the idea. They're not the idea.
Going back to that journey after you did the wellness, you can't put a bumper sticker on wellness, I think you said.
Yes. I might not get invited back to the wellness pavilion at HD, but
Well, it's actually funny. So on the whole wellness thing, I get the feeling of what it is. And I recognize it when there's an effort to address body, mind, and spirit, right? Um, I have a really good family friend who she's in her 80s. She used to study Pilates with Joe Pilates, like way back in the day. She did some of the first Pilates studios out in New Mexico. Um, and she's a lifelong entrepreneur. She's really remarkable. I can't wait to send this to her because she's going to like yell at me that I didn't do it right or something. But she has a word for like there's like all of these legions of people in the wellness world. She calls them wellness bitches. And in her 80s, I'm like, great, Joan, like you go. But I feel like the bumper sticker of wellness kind of, by using that term, that bumper sticker of wellness, it's like it's become a misplaced idea, I think. And it's kind of like, it when you feel it, when you're fully addressed there. But Joan, that was for you. I can't wait to send you that. But they saw you on this panel. You wind up getting an RFP. You've never done an airport lounge before. Just to give us a scope for all of the capital expenditure that American Airlines, I'm sorry, would roll out to redo all of their lounges. Like how big of a number is that? And why do you think they entrusted that huge number to you who had no experience doing it?
I mean, it's funny because I did sort of lean into the process. I knew we were an outlier for sure.
Mhm.
So, and it was Mimi. So I called Mimi and I said, I'm coming to Dallas Fort Worth. I want to say hi. So, on my own dime, flew down, met some of the team that we ended up working with throughout the project. And then this went back and forth over a year. And I probably had my worst interview for a project that I've ever had in any job. And I thought for sure they weren't getting this because it was sort of going up the food chain at American. And I think there was a status quo or a certain set of criteria, how they evaluated, architecture firms. And, we're not a 400-person firm. We're between 20 and 30 people. And we touch everything. Like there is no interiors department in our office. If you start a project, you finish it. And if we need to make a custom light fixture for it, we'll figure that out with that same group. So there's no production line. And I think sort of talking through some of this stuff, God bless Mimi. I don't know what she did internally, but she must have gone to the mat for us, because I don't know if it was, we keep doing the same thing over and over again, and we keep getting sort of corporate looking, nice interiors, but they still feel like you're warehousing both people and furniture. So we had to ask a ton of questions, and we literally did full-size mock-ups in the office. So eventually there was a lot of work and rigor. And I think at least one person at American said, nobody's ever worked this hard for us, in terms of trying to sort of deliver something. So I think, sort of leaning in and going to school, on those projects, there's a payback for us from what we, that makes us better for what we do next. But I also think there's a payback for the client as well, in terms of getting something that can move the needle, or, transcend that sort of traditional, this is what the airport lounge is, but what could it be? And if you don't take program as a constraint, and just talk about the sort of process, and you're engaged, you discover things along the way that sort of move how you think about things. Like, one of my favorite things about the project is that we don't have those robust corner guards and those end tables that look like, mini tanks, with stainless steel, because these are harsh environments with luggage. And there's a part of DFW, which still the old part of the airport, that has the 8x8 tiles with the 1/4-inch grout joints. And I remember Mimi took me back to the airport, or she picked me up there, and we're walking through the concourse. And I was embarrassed because my roller bag was doing ba-dum, ba-dum, ba-dum as I go through. So, sort of fast forward, a year and a half later, we're talking about, the materiality and the endurance of this space. So we ended up developing a rumble strip that it's 9 inches deep. It goes around all the wooden elements. So there's an audible deterrent now at American Airlines at Reagan National, that if you have a roller bag and you get too close to any of the finishes, there's an audible deterrent. There's a rumble strip that wraps around. And that became, just sort of being aware. And it wasn't an obvious solution at the front end, but it solved the problem of, I don't want to have corner guards and everything. So how do we protect this and make it survive? And again, it's more sustainable because you're not replacing things over time.
Going back to that first interview that you did, so they found you at the Wellness Pavilion. You were speaking. It led to this interview that you said was the worst interview of your career.
That was maybe 2 or 3 later, but yes.
Oh, okay. How do you think you went from that and not having experience to ultimately convincing them? Like, what do you think that argument was, or that feeling, or that shared passion for the challenge that lay ahead? How did you square that circle?
Well, I think the passion and what I do is sort of evident. And I flew down there. We have a marketing book. I sort of, brought a couple of those and went through a bunch of projects. None of them were airport lounges, by the way, of course. But talked about even one of my first projects, like in Chicago on my own, was a hair salon. It was, for a celebrity hair guy, Mark Jacochi. And I'd never done hair salon before. He told me later, I gave you one in the suburbs. So if you, effed it up, it didn't matter. It mattered, but it didn't matter that much. So that's a boost of confidence, right? But, I'd worked in Barcelona on, some Olympic stuff, in the early 90s, and food and beverage. So it was really, hair salons, even though I'd never done it, and I'd worked in London on teaching hospitals, building design partnership. And it was really, that hair salons is really the clinical side of healthcare, or the service side of restaurants. So, I've got this. And we figured out a lot of stuff, again, by watching people work. How much space do they need? If you're cutting hair, do you spin the chair? Do you walk around? And I know way more about hair than I should. But I realized early on, again, they care as much about their profession as we do about ours. And I sort of told some of these stories to the American Airlines. So, like, this is how we approach every project. We're very good listeners, and we can problem solve. So there was sort of a courtship at the early end. Then I finally got to meet, the head of real estate and some of the other people. And I think that's when the sort of tough questions came, because it's like, what What's your branding arm in your office? The sort of typical things that get handed down in the bigger firms. And like, we don't outsource that. If we're engaged in a project, we will sometimes handle the branding or, work with the owner and that part of it. But I think getting rid of a lot of the wayfinding signage, for example, it took a little bit of them to sort of come along and say, well, no, this is our brand standard for where we tell people to go in the space. But it's like, you don't need it. It's confusing. Or even like the sign, the museums and monuments, from DC with the American Airlines logo that's seemingly carved out of a block of stone. Getting them to sort of lean into that it became a sort of part of the culture of a place and inspired by that place that, it wasn't an 11th hour decision, but it didn't fit into their brand standards for their signage package. But again, working with some great people at America that cared as much as we did, they had the courage to sort of run it up the food chain and say, this is what we're doing. Or maybe they didn't and just were willing to follow in their sword as well as I was to make the right decision.
And just to further contextualize the outcome of that project at Reagan, the points guy who I follow loved it. Like, how did that all come up? And like, walk us through that kind of an accolade or recognition. Like, how did you hear about it? And then what did it make you feel?
I mean, it was interesting because I think they came out very early. So like the nicest, I can't remember the quote. I don't want to put words in that, but it was something like, you might want to just miss your flight or, whatever. But I remember seeing somebody sent me the article and he does his own photography. We didn't talk to him. There was no like I'm showing up on Tuesday, but
Well, it's like a mystery shopper almost, right?
it's a free shopper and he doesn't know. And I thought the photographer, I was like, I wish I could have sent you some nicer photography, but he doesn't. I'm sorry, I don't want to get in trouble. But it was sort of a nice, I think I always tell clients, and again, for the points guy, like, we learn more from criticism than it looks great. Like, I'd rather hear, how do we get better for the next project? So as much as a pat on the back is nice, I'd rather sort of hear like what's missing, what's wrong. And then we've done all of Michael Jordan's work over the years for his restaurants, food and beverage, and he's not really engaged like in the day-to-day meetings. I've maybe met him 3 or 4 times. I remember at one opening, I finally got a chance to talk to him and he's like, yeah, this is great. Like, I'd rather hear what you don't like. And then, the trash talking came out, like, in the sense that, don't worry, I would tell you if I didn't like it, sort of thing. So,
wow. So when going back to the criticism really helps you evolve, basically, is what you said. Doing that project, the Admirals Club, and the feedback that you've gotten and what you've learned, and it, by all accounts and all measures, it's a very special place. What did you learn from that you're taking forward? What was the biggest growth idea that you had that you're taking forward and applying to new projects?
I think for that one, because it was the first one, and perfection is something that we all try to get to, and it's an impossible sort of mountain to climb, if you will. But we pushed so hard. We were on site, an incredible amount of time, and I think everything mattered. And I think from a sort of speed to market standpoint, and I think we've learned a lot in terms of, could we tweak a few things to make it easier to build? Yes. Some of the details that we sort of push for, were they important? Yes. Is there a simpler way to do them? But I think there's so many. I guess what I'm proud of as well, and realizing that, I've been back through there over the last couple of years, dozens of times. The staff takes such pride and such good care of it because I think there's a sense of ownership because they understood like the sort of, not necessarily the effort sort of going in to put it together, but I think there's something to be said about if you create something with care and people are proud of it, and even that it goes back into the back of house space as well. I think I think they will do, for the most part, a better job of taking care of it.
Yeah, I gotta reach out to my mother-in-law. She used to work at the Admirals Club at SFO forever and ever and ever, and she maybe has friends that work there. Get her feelings on it. Um, the idea of that rumble strip audible deterrent, it's making me think about what you mentioned before. It's kind of like that space between, right? You're kind of creating these spaces, in this case, a deterrent where you're filling in the void and directing people and kind of directing their experience without wayfinding or signage. You mentioned before that the racetrack. How do you refer to it?
The Concourse Club, yeah, in Miami.
When we spoke about that, there was this other space between or filling of the void that I was really intrigued by that also involved audio, which was taking the sounds of cars going around a racetrack and creating a sculpture out of it. Can you fill us all in on that? Because I do like this idea of the space between and kind of filling the void.
I mean, that was an interesting project in the sense that we were brought in 2017 and we opened the second phase at the end of 2022.
Hmm.
But a big piece of the work in that project was done during 2020. So when everyone else was staying home or working from home or not working, I did, I think I did 167 flights, commercial, and maybe another 20 private that year. And it was my client. We were still, we had several phases of the project going at the Concourse Club. I was going down once, twice a week. I mean, they were single flights, so divide that by two for the round trip. Um, and there's a permacast wall around this 77-acre site, and I would go in, I would, flying with mock-ups and meet with the contractors, and I'm like, every time I flew down, I was like, why am I doing this? I was just here 3 days ago, and it's like, I know why I'm doing it, because that would have been effed up if I didn't show up this week again. So, but during that whole process, Elio Castronaves, who anyone who follows racing, he's one of the founding members. He's won Indy 3 or 4 times. I got to know him a little bit, not a ton, but when I would be driving up to the job site, you could hear people on the track. They're ripping around the track, and there's a sound that's, again, I'm not into that. I don't do circuit driving, so I don't really I understand it. But there was one every once in a while, it would just sound different, and I'm like, I would talk to Aaron Wise or one of the guys, like, who's on track. Well, that's Elio Castronaves, and he, again, the professional driver, it just sounded different. So, and we had taken one of the tuning shops to build this temporary clubhouse. So it's a 20-foot tall box. And we needed some ceiling element to sort of fill the void. There's 11 turns on the track. So, I sat right seat, got to do some rips around the track with one of the professional drivers, got a recording of Helio of him driving. So again, sort of trusting the process, they're opening in 2 months. We need something. So one Sunday night, I tell my wife, I'm going into the office to work on this ceiling piece. So literally, headphones on, eyes closed with, charcoal, just sketching what does the sound of the track look like. And then literally bending armature wire. It's a 1-50 scale. It's a 250-foot piece of pipe that we ended up bending, 11 turns. And actually this is one of the first models that happens to be still here. So this is the ugly model with the 11 turns that are masking taped together. And so it was sort of this wonderful, piece that came out of just being present. And if it wasn't for maybe all the flights to Miami that year, or it might have been a totally different thing. And that's where I think when architecture and interiors does not become a commodity, there's so much opportunity for discovery and creating something wonderful.
Well, it's also this. I think what else I also appreciated about that story is this idea of not just drawing, but also creating and making, like bending the wire, creating the sculpture, and then to hear that you worked at Jordan Mosier, it brought me back to stories that Larry Traxler, I hear Mike Sumi talk about, where they, working there having to actually make stuff and do castings and build things that were just not just done two-dimensionally, but you're actually building. How do you think that experience early in your career helped you later in your career when trying to fill the void?
Well, I think it pulls you away from the catalog, if you will. I mean, something. I mean, anyways, there's still dear friends, Larry and Mike Sumi, and we all started around the same time. I was definitely Larry and Mike were there before I was,
They're
and
so much older, right?
that's so much older.
Hey, everybody. We've been doing this podcast for over 3 years now. And one of the themes that consistently comes up is sustainability. And I'm just really proud to announce that our sponsor, Berman Falk Hospitality Group, is the first within our hospitality industry to switch to sustainable and recyclable packaging, eliminating the use of styrofoam. Please check out their impact page in the show notes for more info.
I mean, fun. Well, a quick story on how I got hired. It was I just graduated. It was 1992, and I flew to Chicago to look for work, and it was Mike Sumi that actually interviewed me because Jordan told me to go away because he just had flown back from Germany, didn't want to talk to me, and they were looking for somebody with 20 years experience. Well, my background, just my dad was a builder. I had built 2 spec homes on my own when I was in high school, believe it or not, in a very small province of Canada, Prince Edward Island. And so I had a construction background. So much like what I think some of those conversations that got me in the door at Jordan Moser's prepared me for the American Airlines thing, almost 30 years later. And that being an internal optimist and somehow I could build a bridge between my collective memory or experience and have no business getting the job that I'm applying for. But so I had done castings, for some reason I thought it was a good idea to cast the roof of my model in architecture school. So I befriended some people at the art school, did some investment casting and, so I had sort of that background. So Jordan
You made your little, like your architectural model, you gave it a cast roof that normally you would do in Strathmore.
I carved it out of white foam, brushed with white glue, buried in a bucket of sand, and then poured aluminum into it. No idea what I was doing, and this was when I was in architecture school. So, I think there's always that sort of process of then not getting the job that I had no business getting because I had 2 months of experience, like not 20 years. But 6 months later, I'm on a plane with Jordan and Mike, and we're flying to Frankfurt, Germany for a restaurant, and we're working insane hours, but it was almost like an atelier where, I tell people in the office now that I've had my own firm for almost 30 years, like I wouldn't trade those days for anything. Working when we were working, crazy hours, but it didn't feel like work. It was, and Jordan's a great guy, and we're still friends to this day, and we all were connected. It's almost like being in the trenches together, sort of doing stuff. And I think that's what's missing, or that's what people that would rather work from home or not sort of be in the trenches and that, because I think we've learned so much from each other, and I think there's still a bond and a respect for Jordan, what he brought to the table in terms of like, we're going to stay up all night and do watercolors. Okay, let's do it. I mean, crazy, right?
And casting and carving, and it seemed like, I don't know, it just seemed like the ultimate Santa's workshop, right? Where you're just like the elves, like pulling these amazing things together with working with materials that you normally wouldn't work with. And I love how you said it really pulls you away from the catalog because you're actually trying to make whatever that thing is.
And I think, I think, 2 plus 2 is never 4 in what we do, or, it's a production firm at that point. And it's not that you need to make it more difficult, but there's so many to sort of keep evolving the profession. And, before the written word, we understand the history of the world through design, essentially, how to be, it's part of our culture, and it should be an important, so that sort of connective tissue to, this sort of moment in time and space, and that it's not, again, I don't think we apply any of that. And I think much like I said about, you can't bumper sticker wellness, like I don't think you can bumper sticker hospitality either. Like it's not just, I have nice tables and chairs and it's a restaurant, so it's a hospitality space. No, there sort of has to, dig in at a deeper level.
If you were to think about some other projects where you're approaching it with no prior experience, I know you mentioned a hair salon, you meant to mention an airline club, a racetrack lounge. Um, what's something else where it's like you've filled a void and created some weird new materiality or used it and just created some weird new bizarre form?
So this is one of the projects I'm most excited about now. I can't say too much. But somehow we're doing 3 golf course related projects, whether it's accommodation. Actually, Mike Subi brought me on one of these um, that we're working on together. And there's another one in South Florida in the West Palm Beach area, and another one in Canada that for Clubhouse. I think a similar story to the American Airlines one that we got to this clubhouse with this incredible opportunity through a restaurant that we did, a supper club that we did in Wisconsin that got published in Wallpaper magazine. So some retired CEO saw they reinvested in their clubhouse. They're interviewing 2 clubhouse architects that's all they do. And let's give this guy a shot. So so much American Airlines is like, I'm coming down for the interview. And what experience do you have? None. And I sort of went through, again, more of a process than anything. And that that it's never about program to me. It's never, I think real architecture and design needs to transcend the program. So maybe the program's a vehicle to test an idea. But so again, fast forward, we got the project. We got the first phase of it to do concept stuff for it. And, there's a Mount Rushmore of golf course designers. The designer of this course is one of those 4. And there was a process of I'm doing a lot of, again, research on, I'm still trying to break 90 in my golf game. So I'm an avid golfer. Even if I'm not that good, I love the game, but I don't know that much about the sport. But I started to sort of lean in and do the research and reading about this golf course designer. Then he said he never finished a set of drawings. Then he would just sort of work with the land and do things. So I literally, again, similar to the bent wire sculpture for the Concourse Club, it's like, what if this time we didn't start with drawings? And I did some hand sketching, but what if we started with, just sort of working the landscape? So literally, again, it seems to be always on Sunday, but go to Home Depot, buy a bag of playground sand, and we made this little box, something I could work with, and sort of cut and fill in. So I made this sand box that's 6 by 9. I used some of the kitchen tools that people are normally eating up from. So I think they're back in the kitchen now, so it's all good. But carving the sand, dipping some burlap into white glue, letting it hard, and then pouring plaster into it, and then taking this piece and inverting it and saying, what if we did like this inverted land? So a lot of the concept came out of the process of building and making. It didn't come out of a programmatic research on what do people do for golf course clubhouses. And it became this celebration of the course, the culture of this place. It'll be going on 40 years, the next couple of years. So, but this was one of those moments where we did one scheme to renovate the existing clubhouse, and this other one, this was, am I going to get fired moment, and sort of having that courage sometime that if we just have to do this big mansard roof or this big, basically an oversized residential monster clubhouse, I don't want to do it. I'd rather do something else. So we presented it a couple of weeks ago, or maybe a month ago at this point, and now they can't unsee it.
Yeah. So okay. So you did an inverted, I'm envisioning the form of a inverted burlap basket or something super organic and textured. How do you take that and say, this is what I want to do?
So the first one was this clunky thing. It wasn't to scale. It was too chunky. And then, and it's the marshland. So it's very, flat. So the next one, I restricted myself to a 1/2 inch thick piece of basswood, and It's been a while since I've carved basswood, maybe since I've been at Jordan's actually. But so ordered some Japanese wood carving chisels because it's an excuse to buy.
Or gear, yeah.
We're going to do it. And then I went back in and made a second model. Now, this was the topography, it was a half-inch thick, so it was much more gentle and subtle. And then cut the center of this and flipped it, and it became,
No mansard roof found.
and it's sort of a non-building. It's sort of a non-building
Yeah.
as well. And then again, some of the nuance of the talking about being a good listener, they talked about as one of the early meetings that they're trying to figure out how to light like the water feature in front of the clubhouse. Like, please don't overlight it. So one of the things was, what if we have this, it's sort of an homage to the golf course designer, but if we bounce light off the ceiling, the underbelly of the structure, when the sun goes down and that becomes the nightlight, then we sort of have moonlight over this body of water that, when if you drive it by past a body of water with moonlight, it follows you.
Mm.
So we get this reflected light off the building. So it became some of these sort of very innocent conversations early on snuck in the back door of the design process. And we never would have got there without, if it wasn't for the client, if it wasn't, it changes the trajectory of the creative process. Like you get bumped and you go over here because the client says something, and honestly, sometimes it's not even for this project. You'll be so excited about something, go into a meeting, and somebody will just suck the wind out of your sails because they say something. Again, that's the criticism part. But come back the next day and you'll realize maybe a month later that you're in a much better place because of that comment. And maybe it's a functional issue or it could be something, but it's really, I think, why it's love what I do, because there's surprises every day, and it's not always fun, but for the most part, it's fun.
And when you start, I guess for every project you do, or maybe I'm wrong, but it's not like you get to experiment with rolling your sleeves up and making a mess, or do you? Do you like to, for every project, really like to build a form or work with new materials and buy Japanese chisels?
I mean, honestly, I think because so Dan, this is year 29 since I started. I started maybe too young. Maybe I should have made more mistakes with somebody else's money before I started on my own, in 1995. But I think I most want to go back to the simplicity and honesty of that research-based work. And I remember that sort of anxiety, that white piece of paper I remember that anxiety I had in school, like you're trying to make these great projects and make it perfect. And I think what the last 30 years has given me is the confidence to say, if you trust the process and do the work, it'll be more than okay. It'll be great if you get the opportunity, to build this. And I think that's where I'm trying to find more of those moments too. Like if I want to build a model, I can't. If the principal of the firm is in the basement in their wood shop for like 4 days building a model, it's probably not the right answer. But I'm sort of doing it. It's sort of going back to the Jordan days. I'm doing it. I'm doing it I'm doing it in the off hours, if you will. Like if it's. I'll often tell my wife I'm going to the office for a few hours. But I remember when I built this model, I had to see the sun come up. Yeah, I want to see the sun sort of wash over this thing. It's like, she's like, where are you? I was like, I'll be home when the sun comes up.
Wow.
And that sounds really crazy, I know.
No, it's not at all. It actually it's going back into that kind of first principle origin story for you of building homes and casting roofs for models, and it and working at Jordan. It just seems to me like, that rolling your sleeves up and making something is really part of your, it's first principle, and just it's your ground floor and how you build off of. And I think it's really I think it's really cool to do that, because then it's also just, um I think based on just these couple of stories that you shared, everything should just be very different from the last. obviously you still take a lens of experience and and functionality to go over everything, but it's a way to keep pushing and being crazy. But how do you find clients other, like you shared with American Airlines, and also the golf course? But I have to imagine that many owners or developers do not, they want to go like the safest route possible. They don't want to really push the envelope because it's a lot of money they're talking about. So how do you screen or attract or find mutual admiration and connection with your clients?
I mean, it's almost like we're always second or third on the match, which I'd like to change that somehow. Where, like, for example, even for the Concourse Club, we had done a lot of, high-end automobile dealerships, whether it's, Bugatti, Maserati, Lamborghini, Ferrari, whatever, and the owner of this club, um, was, he's gone through a second or third architect. Again, if you go to people that design private automotive country clubs, like the racetracks, so these utility buildings or pre-engineered buildings, you, you can close your eyes and imagine what they look like.
Mm.
So he was getting frustrated that he didn't like it. So, I had met him a year and a half earlier because the owner of the Bentley Lamborghini dealership that we worked a ton for introduced us. He said, why don't you come down and do a clubhouse for us? We were doing like the sales center and a clubhouse for him. And then we took over why did we move the building? We talked about, the acoustical, how do you make sure that a 77-acre site doesn't become the target parking lot when the lights go down? And, how do you make this 77-acre site a hospitality room on the outside? So we started, whether it's the comfort station or the shade structure, or we built, 50 private garages or 49 on the north side of the garage, and push them in closer to the track so it changed the acoustics of the space. And these are still the same type of structures that the other architects that were before me were using. But how do you take that and still craft something worth building? And like, whether it's tilt, concrete, the same company that was doing Amazon warehouses in Miami made this for us. And, it has a different presence on site and it sort of defines the space. And so although we treated the 77-acre site by understanding the negative space again. Rather than having walls to define rooms, we had buildings to define acreage of what was left on the site.
No, it's like, how do you find and select these owners who are willing to take a flyer on you? And you're like, I'm not, I want to say unconventional approach, but I'm sure that there's a lot of people that approach things this way. But it's like look like this negative space idea keeps coming up, and it's kind of hard to get people's minds around it. But I feel like as you're working with your hands and kind of experimenting, that's really when you get to touch and feel that negative space. And it just seems like a hard sell to someone who's a more traditional developer. But I'm so happy you're able to make that connection. So how do you find and connect with people and make sure that they share a vision before you go down the road too far?
But I think a lot of it's referral, honestly. Like
Mm.
the Midtown Athletic Club, which is, I think we did our first project for them in 2007 or 8. We did a health club for them in Montreal.
Mm.
And I met that client through the construction manager for Midtown, was also a construction manager for the Michael Jordan restaurants. And they had just spent, again, it was another big firm. They just spent $1 million in fees with a bigger firm for the renovation in Montreal. And they didn't think it was worth building. So now I'm coming in after the client had just burned $1 million in fees. I don't say he hates architects, but so he was interviewing 2 or 3 new architects. And again, we'd never done a health club, same story all over again. And we had done a little bit of sketching, trying to figure out, the problems with the space. And he gave us this one, I think it might've been the smaller of the 3 projects that he was doing.
Mm.
Before we opened Montreal, we had taken over the other 2 projects, and there has not been a month in 20 there has not been a month since 2007 or 8, whenever we started, that we haven't done work. So the pandemic, 2008, we have 5 projects going for them now. In 2017, we opened, an $85 million renovation build, the Chicago Mothership, which is the most successful health club in the world right now.
Really?
We added, and this is a client that, we'll go back and forth. And he at one point said, if I stop yelling at you, I don't care. And I mean, I'd say that I wear that like a badge, and it's sort of say that it's a little tongue in cheek because we get along perfectly fine. But there have been moments where, he'll put me in my place like, we're out of money, stop designing. And I respect that. There's been times where maybe it's behind schedule. It's not our fault. It's, but no, we still got to finish this. And so I think there's a mutual respect, and I think the projects are better because of his vision for what he wants to build. And he knows there's probably, he could build these cheaper and probably pay less in fees if he didn't have.
Totally.
I don't know if he would be the most successful health club in the world without us either at this point. So we're renovating that one. And I remember that he came through Cornell, and I think he went to the hospitality school. He was in the hotel business for a while. And we'd never done a hotel, but now we're doing 55 rooms on top of this, as part of this project. He's like, I don't know, you've never done a hotel before. So I remember him coming in and like, there's no way we're not doing this hotel. So I remember again, without a contract, but on our own dime, we put together a mood board. He thought it was somebody else's hotel he was looking at. He said, that's what I want. He's like, that's your hotel. That's what we've designed.
So it's like, it's got to be this, they must appreciate the unconventional perspective. But you have to be able to give yourselves time to kind of get to know how each other operate, and also just respect that adventurous process to get to the end result. And it just seems like that to me does not seem like the traditional developer, right? It's always someone who kind of wants to push the envelope.
Now, I've seen so many, I guess what frustrates me, and when you see so many bad, and I wouldn't say bad, but if the spaces don't make sense, like I talk about the negative space always before the materiality, but we've been brought in we've acted as, architecture and interior designer. We love doing both. We've been AOR, where we've worked with, AJ Capital for some of the graduate hotel projects where we were shepherding through their design team. We were the architect of record. We're doing other projects with, where we're the interior designer and that there's an architect of record. And we play well with other firms and can do that. But I think when you sort of get that holistic approach, there's such an opportunity to make it, or at least even if you get some impact in on like if we're the interior designer, we want to make recommendations on the layout in terms of what this, again, because I'm always thinking about what does it feel like to walk through that space, not what does the wall look like.
Yeah.
Wall, it changes that experience, and I wonder too, Dan, because I told you when I grew up in Prince Edward Island, which is a small province in Canada, 100,000 people, and there's really no building. I mean, there is now, but there was no building department per se. So when I was building these builder houses in high school, like I was literally I was, pouring the foundation, I was putting the floor on, I was doing the roof, I was laying tile, I was building cabinets, we were doing everything. But, when I started with my dad, sort of very young, he would have like one piece of paper. He knew how big the house was going to be. And then we would get the foundation and put the floor deck on. And I remember he would sort of take these boards, we would be doing a plan full size, trying to figure what size the rooms are. So I don't know if there's a spatial perception, but if I'm sketching, it's not line work. You try to always be in the room, if that makes sense. And I don't really, I stopped doing CAD a long time ago. I don't do Revit. I mean, I'm still sketching, and I don't know if. I guess I hope that this next generation of designers they're in the room. They're not just seduced by the material palette in front of them, because I think that's so important to embellish everything we do, but it shouldn't be it shouldn't be the solution.
I love the idea of really trying to force yourself into the room and into the space, because then like you're trying to get this visceral feeling and connection with what the end result could be. And oftentimes I feel like that's a missed process in many people's processes, right? It's it's really cool to it's really awesome to hear. And thank you for sharing. If you so as you're looking at all these projects that you've worked on and looking out to the future, what do you think is exciting you most about the future?
I mean, I think we're getting the opportunity to do more ground up work, which I'm really excited about. Again, there's this thing in South Florida, like this clubhouse I'm talking about. We actually have a project we have several ground up projects under construction. I think where we get to, look at how we're siting the buildings, and how do you, again, I've always been inspired by I would say the benign in a way, like
Mm,
I think you have to walk the site and understand it. And even if it's an interiors, you have to understand who you're building for and where you're building. And I think the sort of nuance of experience and that collective memory, like the more things that you sort of slip in the back door of the design process, then they don't belong to a trend. They don't belong to, something on Instagram or God forbid Pinterest, and then even with AI sort of layering in, influence now. And I think AI is an interesting one in the sense that if it allows you to sort of consolidate and abstract ideas, and again, deflect the departure point in the creative process in terms of where you start. But as long as it's not where you end, I think it's a very valuable tool, and maybe sort of being a can opener for the mind, and like, what are the opportunities that you haven't thought of? Because often I think some of the model making and some of these, whether it's the model making or the bending of the wire, I think it's taking yourself out of the comfort zone, so that, because on the creative side, you only know what you know. You can't know more. That it's impossible, but it's sort of this collective memory. So if you do something different and you immerse yourself in something, that's almost like music, that you, I think you can discover things that somehow just sort of, pop in, and that sort of creative spirit. I don't know if I can explain it very well, but it's something where you sort of have to be the act of sort of making and doing, and becomes a very important part of the process, I think. And I remember making models in school, and, you'd be presentations in the morning, you're trying to put stuff together, and you're so focused on what's in front of you. And I mean, honestly, God, like a lot of the times I find the answer in some of the scraps of paper that are the offcuts on the floor. It's like, oh, this is more interesting than what I've been building for the last 6 hours.
well, I think that it all comes down to just allowing creative time and ideas to really germinate, and having that that creative space and that void to allow your brain and ideas to really dance and figure out what might come next. And I feel like it's really important that we all do that. We're all creative, whether we're architects, designers, or anything. And just being able to give ourselves license to explore and think and write and be creative. I think that's really exciting, and all the more important as we go into this brave new world. So
No, that's right. And I think, again, the sort of unbuilt, or there was the supper club we did in Wisconsin.
mm,
The acoustical performance of that space was really important. I mean, every time we do it, but we've gotten so many compliments that I can hear the music and I can hear my friends talk. I can hear everything.
that there is really important for every kind of hospitality space, and I feel like it's just done um, so poorly, um, just because people probably don't allow themselves the time to really solve that challenge.
And it doesn't show up in the photo shoot either. So
Yeah, exactly.
and again, that was another important thing for America. Like the acoustical performance of that space was, we probably definitely tortured the American Airlines folks to try to get that right as well. But I think we got it close. If not, yeah,
Awesome.
maybe not be perfect, but it was worth the effort for sure.
Um, hey, if people wanted to learn more about you or DMAC, what's the best way for them to do so?
Website, dmacarchitecture.com, my email, dmacEwen@dmacarchitecture.com, and our LinkedIn, social media. Somebody else handles that more than I do, but we're not hard to find.
Yeah, and we'll be sure to keep all of that in the notes. Dwayne, I've really enjoyed this conversation, and I don't know, in a way, it's inspired me to just roll up my sleeves and make more stuff. So I just want to say thank you and thank you for your time, and I really hope it helped others want to roll up their sleeves and
Yeah,
make some cool shit.
great. Go buy some Japanese carving chisels and have fun.
I will. So thank you very much for your time and experience, and everyone else, please share this. We grow by word of mouth, so like, subscribe, leave comments, and we'll catch you next.